All right. Welcome to a brand new episode of The Critics. Welcome, everyone. This is a show that we do. It's a panel discussion. And the idea of this is to see if we can level up business and leadership. The topic of today's episode is how do you beat industry expectations for employee production? And in this show, we're going to take a look at some data. We're going to take a look at some real live examples and use a panel of experts to give some of their reflections and perspectives from many years who have been there, done that, on how they might approach things differently and how you might be able to change that leadership style, change the behaviors that occur in your organizations, and maybe even the outcomes. A couple of ground rules. This is a live event. And if you have any questions, you have any thoughts, you want to get the panel to answer your question, there's a chat box or a comment box that you can jump into and just say, hey, I got a question, and ask whatever you'd like. I'll put those in front of the panel. They'll also see it as well. Throughout the course of this, though, you'll be able to ask those questions and we'll be able to see them. So shape the discussion, get the most out of it that you want. But I'd like to start first by introducing a couple of our panelists. I'm going to start first in no particular order with Jason from Nozzle Nolan. Jason, hey, how you doing today?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Rich, yourself?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Super. And Dan, last but not least, how's everything showing up for you today?
Everything's great. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this. And the first thing I'd like to ask of those who are watching in from the audience is, I'd like to hear where you're connecting in from. We've got people that connect from all across the globe. Tell me where you're connecting from, whether it's a particular state, particular country. I'd love to understand where you're connecting in from. Please type that into the comments. So I want to start out with a couple of questions around this idea of employee production and industry expectations for production. I'm going to start, Rich, I'll start first with you, kind of as an opening kind of question. When you saw this title, how do you beat industry expectations for employee production? What are the first couple of thoughts that went through your mind when you heard
that? You're doing it wrong was the first thought that went through my mind, because usually what happens is you think about production and what do you want to try to do? You try to come up with a method to improve your productivity. Maybe it's Six Sigma, maybe it's some other lean process, maybe it's Kaizen. Who knows what it is, but it seems to be that you got to come up with some type of process to increase the productivity to make you a more productive employee. And I think that can be a little frustrating if you're the employee receiving that information.
Dan, how about yourself? Same question. What went through your mind as you first heard this topic?
I was getting on an airplane and I had the prompt and I started writing down. I came up with 27 different things that I could think of. But mostly it comes down to self-inflicted wounds. How do you just stop tripping over your own feet and make life easy for everybody?
And tell me, you're talking about that from a leadership perspective, right? How do you to some degree get out of your own way?
Yeah, from a leadership perspective, and how does the leadership help your employees get better? How do you make their lives easier? How do you remove chaos and burden from their lives and just smooth the skids, so to speak? Just move things easy, make it easy.
I'm curious for those who've connected in. What did you first think of? I would love to, please type that into the comments. I'd love to hear what thoughts, ideas went through your head when you first saw this topic that made you block off that time to potentially join this conversation. Please type that into the comments. Jason, how about yourself? I wanted to kind of run maybe that question out with you. What came to mind when I first put that up as sort of the topic of today's conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rich actually kind of put it more eloquently than I would have, but it's really that blanket that we kind of use, like, hey, we're going to become more productive by doing this, and trying to just force it on everyone unilaterally without really breaking down what those individuals need. And really focusing on an individual level on your employees. So kind of along those same lines.
So I did a little bit of research on YouTube. I found that YouTube actually is I think it's the second behind Google itself. It's the second largest search engine, right?
Yep.
And I found this neat little TikTok. Actually, I got to watch a little video there as I've been starting to post more on TikTok. It said, if you want to find topics that people are searching on, the easiest thing to do is just go to YouTube. You don't even have to sign in. Just go to YouTube and type in the search bar a particular topic, and you'll see what are the things that people are most searching for. So I typed this idea of employee productivity and employee production. And the first thing that came up was, how do I increase employee productivity and also employee satisfaction? Dan, I will start with you. I mean, I think this is kind of touching a little bit on what you were already saying, right? I mean, this is what came up first in that list is, I want to increase my production, but I don't want to drop my satisfaction at the same time. Do you see those as two separate things? What are your thoughts on that topic?
No, they're tied together. They go hand in hand. I think you can make your work life better. It makes everybody's just life better. Things like tapping into people's intrinsic motivations. We're coming out of the 20th century industrial complex mindset of command and control, where we took, people and they made widgets, and then we've taken this concept and we've applied it to creative workers. I think what we're seeing is a lot of fallout from that because we're not empowering our employees enough. We have people who have college degrees who are turning into order takers. Why aren't we, giving them the opportunities to be thinkers, what they've been training their whole lives to be? And I think when you start to do that, you start to see that, they do feel better about their job, and there's more we can do in that way.
So for those who may have joined in a little late, we're talking about this topic of how do you beat industry expectations for employee production? And the question was centered around this idea of what I typed into YouTube search. And I saw that one of the first questions that people type in is, how do I increase employee productivity and also employee satisfaction? Rich, any thoughts on kind of what Dan said there on that response?
Yeah, he touched on a couple of important things. One, he talked about the Industrial Revolution. He used a more sophisticated word than I used, but the Industrial Revolution set us back as a society a long ways, because what it did is it set up a hierarchical structure, and it created the word manager. Manager never existed until the Industrial Revolution came around. And what does a manager do? A manager controls. What are they controlling? Well, somebody came up with the bright idea that they need to control everything, including people. You know what? People we're all different. Nobody's the same. There aren't two people in the world that are like, even identical twins are not alike. So you got to treat everybody differently. But yet there's this whole methodology out there that says, hey, we just got to drive and do production, and the hierarchy sets all that up for it. And it's actually setting us up for failure, because everything's got to be measured. And if you can't measure it, you can't quantify it, then therefore it's not any good. I mean, how do you measure leadership? It's extremely difficult. But you can measure production, you can measure profits, you can measure your process. There's all kinds of things on that side you can measure. And when you start measuring things and you're putting numbers to it and quantifying it, research and science actually shows that you demoralize, you dehumanize the human being, and you make them feel insignificant.
So for those who might be listening in now or in the future, I would love to hear, because I think a little bit of what I heard from you, Rich, is I may be putting a very dramatic word on this, but that word manager to some degree has met its obsolescence. It really just is kind of trying to force a construct on a company that doesn't really do service to everyone else. But Jason, I'd love to hear your comments and see if you think that word manager has kind of maybe reached its limit as well. Jason, what do you think about that topic? You've got a large team of people that you're managing on a regular basis. Does that word manager work all the time?
No, and I think, more than anything, and we've seen this change in the retail world and in a lot of the service industry recently, is more towards the coach or it's not so much managing the people, but helping them achieve what you're looking to get. Being able to work with them on an individual basis and see what it is that they need help with. But back to, the point Dan made, the two pieces being hand in hand, an employee who feels like you're helping them on an individual basis and not just, okay, this is what we're doing for everyone, they're going to be happier, and they're going to feel like they're more involved in their workplace, and the people want them to succeed. And so it does, they're going to be more productive because you're helping them with where they need help. they're going to be happier because they feel like you're paying attention to them on an individual basis. So I think that all does go hand in hand and work together.
So, I mean, I want to make sure we kind of keep, I kind of keep regrounding us in terms of where this discussion is going, because again, the title is Beating Those Industry Expectations for Employee Productivity. And I think sort of the synthesis of what I'm hearing amongst you all is this idea that if you want to get more productivity, that productivity is a byproduct of attention, coaching, and support of that individual. Am I hearing that right? And am I distilling that properly?
I would agree with that.
I'd agree.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think what Dan said was a key piece in this, and that was the motivational factor. And when you can start motivating people and helping them get what they want, they in return will help you get what you want. And a byproduct of that is production goes up, or productivity, whether they're selling, whether they're making things, whatever their production is. If you start motivating them and meeting them where they're at instead of forcing them to meet you where you want to be, now you've got a mutual relationship and you can actually be more productive.
Yeah.
So please go ahead.
No, say, have you ever worked at an organization where they wanted to keep your personal life and professional life just completely separate? Right. And that was a lot of what we dealt with in, the 20th century was, hey, we work here and then we leave. Well, that cuts people off, right? It doesn't you don't bring your whole self to work then. And I think that's part of it too, is to be able to bring your whole self to work as well.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it doesn't happen often in my house, but we have disagreements between my spouse and my kids and myself sometimes, right? And I may say every now and then I'll go to work, just a little miffed because of my son just deciding he didn't want to do his homework the night before, and we had a discussion. I had a little bit of a row that morning, and until 12 o'clock that day, I hadn't actually quite forgotten about it. And I think that flavors a little bit of how my day goes. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there, Dan, is we're the same person at home and at work. And if you want that productivity to come out, you got to understand the person, not just the role, right?
Absolutely.
So here's what I'd like to do. I tell people a story of when I used to love physics in high school, but you could draw these back when I was in high school. They didn't have whiteboards; that everyone had chalkboards, just slate pieces that they broke off the ground and drew with pieces of bark, right? Way back when. But they would draw all these diagrams and nice, equations and stuff on the board about elastic and inelastic collisions and how these things, conservation of momentum, all those kind of fancy words. But it wasn't until I actually got to crash the two cards together that I was like, oh, the light bulb went off in my head. So what I'd like to do now is not just talk about all this theory. I'd actually like to bring up a couple of graphs on screen that will show you a real life situation about an individual. And when we can take a look at these individuals, maybe ask sort of the panel here to kind of dissect or give some perspective on what they believe is happening in the situation, and how you might be able to react if you have, or respond if you have someone in that sort of situation in your organization. Is that fair?
Sounds good.
All right, let me share my screen. And I got to tell you, sharing screen is supposed to be easy, yet every time it seems to take me more time. Can you all see my screen here?
Yeah,
All good.
All right, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to flip to this is an employee scorecard that we send out. We've changed the names of the people so that you see Robert here. That's not the real name of the individual. This is probably from a couple of days ago. And let me orient anybody who's seeing this for the first time as to what you see. Then I'd love to get some comments. So for everybody in the same exact type of role, we've got a score for the average person in that role. So let's say that this is a technician. That technician, the average technician in this role is a 53 out of 100. This particular technician, Robert in this case, has got a 49 out of 100. So they're doing slightly less than average. And this breaks it down in terms of those different areas, how they're doing. But I think what's most important here is the graph. The graph shows you if it was completely blue, that means they're a highly effective technician. This blue shows you how effective they are. And this gray shows you the average. So you can see slightly better than average in areas like here. So tech referring is like sales, inside sales. Net promoter score is like the customer service score, how they drive the vehicle, how efficient they are at their role. What is their employee experience? How aligned are they with their management, their leadership? And what is their technical skills assessment? Different types of areas that we've assessed with using data to find out how this person presents. Jason, I'll start with you first. I always like to think in terms of A, B, C, D, or A, B, C, D, F in terms of report cards. Looking at this person here, you can kind of see this blue compared to the gray. So they're just slightly better than average in certain areas and they're less than average. Would you call this an A, B, or C employee? Just kind of looking at this. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts, this is a C employee. Outside of tech referring and NPS, they're basically average in everything. And to be honest, seeing the tech referring and NPS are usually two fields that are going to have some relation to each other. So for those to be out of whack like that it leads me to believe that the NPS score is a little bit misleading. And this is an employee that doesn't well with customers, not so much that they don't have good customer service skills.
Sure. Rich, maybe I'll try you next. What are your thoughts when you look at something like this? What comes to mind? What are sort of the narratives that run through your head?
Some of the narratives, first thing I think of is strengths and weaknesses, or strengths and opportunities, if you will. To make the inference that everyone's going to have a well-rounded wheel, if you will, so they're equal all the way around and they're rolling down the road smoothly, isn't going to happen, in my opinion, based on human nature. But now if we could look at some more of these individuals on the teams and find out, okay, what is Robert strong at? He looks like he's strong at, the tech referring, and he's weak on the NPS. Well, there's probably somebody on his team that's strong on the NPS. So how do we balance those two? How do we get those two to work better together to make the overall result stronger? And I don't know if you can measure it and quantify that on a group level, but on an individual level, we can see it. I would expect to have some unbalance in the data that comes back, because honestly, everybody can't be a master of all. Absolutely not.
And I think to your point, look, in order to be able to have an average of an NPS score right here, right, that means somebody's got to be out here, right? So they've got to be, and we see over here some of the top 5 techs. So there are people who are running at much higher scores. I mean, he's got a 49. This person's got an 85. So there are some people who are outstanding people in those roles. I would love to hear from audience, anybody who's listening in live or maybe in the future on a replay. What are you seeing, or what is the narrative that's going through your head as a potential leader here? What do you see? Dan, thoughts? What are you thinking?
My eyes are drawn to NPS and tech referring as well, but priority alignment, something I see a lot with the work that I do is just a lack of understanding between what leadership really wants and how employees are performing. So this is showing me that, Robert is performing above average, but is that good enough? Is there a way to strengthen our alignment across this entire group? What's not being said? What's the message that's being delivered, and how is it being delivered?
And actually, I realize I may have a slightly larger. Yeah, there's a slightly larger view, so you can see it a little bit better. We put those in because someone said last time it's a little too hard to see. So same person, Robert here, and I think what I'm hearing you say is what is the relationship between some of these things together, so we can get a more holistic understanding of what's happening. Let me hazard a story here, and I'm gonna. I don't know this is about being right so much as trying to get a deeper understanding of it. And I'd love to kind of bounce it off of you all. So I'm going to kind of do a read here. Let me see what you all think. So tech referring is a little higher. That's about people skills, right? And I think, Jason, you were touching on that. So looks like this person likes to have conversations with people. But at the same time, they don't like having conversations with people. Maybe they like to do the sales side of it, but they like to get going on and move on to the next thing. Their driver behavior and the efficiency a little below average. Maybe these are just kind of details, and that maybe is informed by this idea that they've got a net promoter score. Gosh, I don't like the detail stuff so much. I like doing maybe a little more of the sale here. It's the employee experience. They're struggling a little bit against themselves because they want to be doing more of this, perhaps, right? Might be their natural proclivity. They kind of get what their management is saying better than the average person, and they've got average skills. Rich, I'll throw this out to you. Could this just be the right person, wrong seat?
Absolutely. There's a lot of underlying things here, behavioral preferences, motivators. And I think what Dan touched on a minute ago on the priority alignment is, I just read an article the other day that I believe Gallup did, maybe it was somebody else, but the number of people that just don't understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing at work. And that number was staggering. It was, if I remember right, it was well into the high 70s, if not the low 80s, percentage that don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So they get hired on, they get thrown in, here you go do your job. And the next thing you know, then a chart like this comes up and says, hey, your priority alignment's off. Well, yeah, no kidding, because I really don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think for me, what, behavior side, and that's what I emphasize on, is this is a question starter, not the other way around. Walk into somebody, hey, your net promoter score really stinks, we got to get this brought up. It's like, hey, is there something going on? How can I help you with your, you don't even have to go to the net promoter score. Like maybe you said earlier, Vinny, you had a bad day at home. Maybe somebody's going through a divorce. Maybe they lost a loved one. Maybe who knows what. I know my wife was in a car wreck a year ago, and I bet you I was a mess at work for 2 weeks after that, trying to figure out, what we were going to do next. And those things, you bring it to work with you. So you've got to ask more questions. You can't just go right at it and say, hey, we need to fix this, this, and this.
Jason, I'll toss this to you. We're talking about production here, right? In your role, you're managing a large team of people. Clearly, the goal, success factors for you is how do we amp up that production? And Rich says this is not conclusive. This is a thread of questioning to find out where we lead. Is that the way you're seeing it? How would you approach something like, someone in this type of role?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think what's important here is, it's easy for us to look at this and say, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But I think what this does is it opens up to the questions that need to be asked. So, like Rich alluded to, maybe it's something going on at home. We see that he's struggling with customers. Maybe that is, the questions we need to ask and see what's causing it. But the other thing that this allows you to do is show somebody relationships between different parts. So, like you were saying, okay, maybe this guy really enjoys the sales part of it. Well, we say that, but he's only slightly above average. Maybe he's slightly above average because he loves selling, even though he's struggling with talking to customers. And being able to show him, hey, building better relationships will increase your sales. That may be what gets him to do better in the NPS, because you can show him that relationship to what he wants to do. As opposed to just shoving down someone's throat, hey, you got to be better with customers. You got to be better with customers. So sometimes being able to take those two things that are on opposite ends of the graph and show someone that relationship and how it can help them be better, that's what can help drive them.
Yeah, I think you've got some nuggets there, right? It's this idea that we have a thread to pull on. It's not the answer, to your point, Rich. It's not the answer. It's a place to start asking questions from. But now we've got a little bit of contextual information. But Dan, this is all about productivity, right? We want to kind of get this person to the next level. And it's, to me, I'm almost seeing there could be like an emotional logjam here. This person does not see that the net promoter score is going to lead to more sales, which is what they really love to do. And they don't know how to do that because maybe they came from another place where all they did was sales. So that operational component is not something they're familiar or comfortable with. And they just kind of shy away from it. When in fact, somebody like Rich had mentioned, there's got to be somebody else who's doing really well in that regard. They walk him through and say, hey, why don't you ask these 3 questions at the end of every appointment, which could increase your net promoter score. Leaning into that, back to that coaching idea. Dan, how does that resonate with you? What are your thoughts?
I think we have a deficiency in, at least around the world, what I've seen in interpersonal communication skills. How to look somebody in the eye and have a conversation. We look at our devices and we communicate and text and all of those things. I think, talking to somebody, somebody's out in the field talking to a customer, what are you doing to help them develop their interpersonal communication skills? Are you putting them through some training? Are you giving them coaching? Like, what are you doing to say, hey, your MPS is terrible, you got to improve that? Okay, how? And how are you helping them improve that? But interpersonal communication skills would be one of those things that to help your team get better, that's one of the places you could definitely start. And that would, I think, relate directly to an MPS score.
So again, for the audience, anybody who might be listening in, I'd love to hear your comments on this. Are there any particular nuggets that you've heard so far from Jason, from Rich, or Dan that have particularly resonated with you so far? And the reason why is I'd like to look at somebody else, right? I mean, I think we could probably talk for an hour just about this one person and kind of speculate. Let's look at another physics problem. So
I'm
going to bring
up another slide. Topping off what Dan talked about is one step in front of interpersonal skills is intrapersonal skills. How do you act from within? And do you know yourself well enough to know how you're going to be able to act with other people? And that is a huge blind spot on a lot of people because they don't know themselves well enough to know how they appear in certain situations. Maybe this guy is just flat out, maybe there's something that's scaring him half to death, but he doesn't know it. And he needs to have that self-awareness.
Yeah. What about group training sessions where you're getting feedback on how you're doing, and communicating to somebody? Perfect. Yeah. Getting feedback from, peer reviews, things like that. Perfect. That's great, Rich.
This guy's allergic to dogs. This guy, whatever, is allergic to dogs, and everyone on their route has got dogs.
Could be.
And it's something that simple, right?
Yep.
Well, so I'm going to switch another one. Here's another person. Call this one Joseph. You can see average roll score again is a 53. Joseph is at a 60. You can kind of see in this case, Rich, and I didn't know that I actually planned this properly this way. But their NPS score is actually, doing quite well. So I'm going to flip to the next screen here, which gives us a little deeper look or a more focused look at this. So, Rich, I'll start with you then, just because of that. This person is excelling on the NPS side, very conscientious on the driver skills and the driver behavior. What appears to you here, Rich?
I would love to sit down with this gentleman and ask questions and do a ton of listening and just ask open-ended questions. How do you do it? What are your tricks? Tell me more. When he gets into something, just keep going, why, how, why? And just keep asking until you can uncover some golden nugget that this individual has on what's making him excel in that area.
Jason?
I mean, the first thing that jumps to me is the priority alignment being low. I see somebody who, at the very least, is average in a few areas above, but that priority alignment makes me feel like he's focusing in areas that maybe aren't what's most important to his manager, and probably leading to his lack of efficiency, and probably his lack of employee experience.
So, Dan, I think I'm paraphrasing for you, Jason. I'm hearing this guy could be a diamond in the rough here if he just was more in alignment with his leadership. Is that what you just heard as well?
Sure. I mean, that's it. Definitely a good assessment. And what I wrote down here is essentially what Rich said here is, what is he doing? What's he doing that's different from everybody else? Why is he so much higher than the average? As a good leader, I hope you're looking at this person and saying, hey, exactly what Rich said, let's have some conversations. I want to understand how you do things, why you do things that way. And then seeing the big picture, how do we translate that across our teams? How do we make our best practices? How do we create training programs around that? And lift up the average. The goal should be that, this average isn't good enough. Like, everybody should be trying to get better. We should be raising the bar and the standards within our organization. And you do that by taking these diamonds and you find out what they do well and then helping everybody else learn from them.
Put the polish on the diamonds and then show it to everyone else and say, hey, here's what that polished diamond looks like. You can get there too. And here's how we got there.
And through iteration, we're going to iterate through it. We're not going to all get it perfect the first time. We're going to try, and we're going to keep trying. And each week we keep trying and do something better.
So, Rich, Jason, what I mean, is this you're looking at an employee like this, being able to see this. I mean, so I'll tell you, generally speaking, something like this is a compilation of probably about 15,000 rows of data, lots and lots of data compressed down into this single snapshot here, right? I want to add one more dimension to this, right? Time, the tenure with a company, right? If this person, so Rich, Rich or Jason, I'd love to hear your response on this. This is a person who's joined the company. They're 4 months into the company. What is that? How does it change your perspective of this person? They're 4 months in.
I mean, if they're 4 months in, I'd be extremely concerned with their employee experience score. Typically, at first 6 months on a job, you're usually in love. And to already be below average, that's concerning.
Rich?
I'm a big believer in strengths, and then I see the priority alignment is a little low. So if he's only been in there for a handful of months, what was his onboarding process? Did we communicate clearly what the goal or what we're trying to achieve? Instead of always looking at the employee being the problem, let's look in the mirror and find out, are we as leaders the problem? Are we communicating clearly on a level that everybody else understands? So sometimes you look at this stuff, you got to look at it as maybe this is a reflection of you and not so much reflection of them. And it was how you're communicating with them. So I try not to take data as value, because there can be flaws, there can be biases in that data. Again, data is awesome to start a conversation. It's a great place for us to open up and sit down and have a discussion about it, not having a collaborative conversation, not a cooperative conversation.
I will agree with that a lot. I mean, having been around the data space a lot, I used to think that data was about answers. Data is actually more about questions, right? Once you start asking, because all data tells you is what's happened in the past, but what got you to today is not going to get you through tomorrow, right? So it's a snapshot in time of where I am right now, and I start to say, this is what's happening, but what do I actually desire, and what sort of knobs, wheels, and levers do I need to change in order to get there? And the only way to do that is by, I think what you're saying, Rich, is start asking some questions, kind of coming back to what you said earlier on, Dan, right? I think that was Rich. You said, how, why, why is this all happening? So Dan, I want to throw this at you a completely different way. So I said, this person's been here for 6 months. This person's been here for 7 years. How does that change your perspective of what's going on?
I mean, we see above average performance in almost every category. Priority alignment would concern me if they've been here that long, but it's not with the individual necessarily. It's also with how you're delivering the message on priority alignment. If someone's been there for 7 years and they're not aligned in priority, that says a lot more about the people who are leading, because they're not delivering that message down to everybody to know this is what we value. You've got limited time, talent, and treasure. These are your 3 limitations, your biggest resources here. You want everybody focused on the most important thing every single day. That comes down to priority alignment. That comes down to speaking your message every single day so that your employees know what they're supposed to be focused on. So if they've been there for 7 years and their alignment score is that low, I'd be very concerned.
And there's 2 words that I like to talk about in terms of a continuum. There's efficiency, which is, I think, where there's a heavy bias towards talking about efficiency. Can I get more and more out of the process? As opposed to effectiveness, can I step up to the next level of performance, right? Yep. And here, if that priority alignment is off, right, it could be that someone's being incredibly efficient in saying the same message over and over again, but this person's not getting it. The company has grown in size. I mean, they started with 5 people, and that's when this person started. 7 years later, they're now at 75 people in the same exact role. They've had some significant growth, and there's a change in priority. And while they're putting posters all over the place saying it, it's not sinking in, because this guy is still thinking, well, hold on a second. This is what we used to do. Why are we doing that? And we're just kind of butting heads at that point. Does that resonate with any one of the 3 of you?
Yeah, and actually, you're kind of going along the lines that I was thinking when you said the 7 years, that most likely priorities have changed. And sometimes it's not even the effectiveness of communicating, but one of the big things from from my past is the WIFM, the what's in it for me. And sometimes we're really good at saying, hey, our new priority is we're pushing sales, but we're really bad at telling our employees, hey, this is what's going to happen when you do it, how it's going to work for you. And so they're just sitting there going, oh, here's the next big thing, flavor of the month, who cares, whatever. And they're still doing the way they did it 7 years ago. But all it really needed was to sit down and say, hey, listen, this is how you're going to make more money, or this is how, we're going to be able to grow and provide more opportunities for you. And those are the type of things that will get the employee behind it.
So I've just come up with a name to it. It's not a very inventive name, but I'm going to call it my ice cream trick. I mean, I think everyone's done this. For my kids, I'm trying to, on a Saturday, we got to go out and, do this, that, and all these other chores. And the kids are like, I don't want to do all that stuff. I said, well, if you guys get your rooms cleaned up, we can do all that stuff. And they have no interest in going to the stores and returning library books and returning shoes or whatever else. They don't want to do all that stuff. Furniture shopping, they hate furniture shopping. But then as soon as I tell them, hey, look, so if you clean up the room, not only does it allow us to do this, but we might even have some time to go get out some ice cream. It's amazing to me how fast that room gets cleaned up. Now, quality of the room cleanup might be a different topic for another day. But I think, Jason, to your point is, I mean, if you you dangle the right carrot at the right time, and they can see what's in it for them, holy moly, what took me an hour and a half of, come on, guys, clean up your room. Come on, guys, clean up your room. To all of a sudden, in 6 minutes, it's finished. They're like, Dad, we're getting ice cream. I was like, gosh, now I guess I'm gonna be held responsible and accountable to getting you some ice cream now.
You have to be careful with the carrots and the sticks too, because once the carrot's been given that first time, the next time you want them to clean their room, hey, are we getting ice cream?
Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
That's an old industrial revolution trick. You just up the ante a little bit, and then before you know it, you got to keep upping it to keep your people motivated. And money's not always the ultimate motivator for people. What about purpose?
Not always.
What is the cause? Why are you doing what you do? Are you selling that with it? And that might even help your priority alignment. If your priorities change, that's great. But without purpose, without knowing why you're doing what you're doing and how you're going to do it, you're never going to have priority alignment.
Which would you have working for you, missionaries or mercenaries? The missionaries are there for the cause. They're the ones when you need to get them to do something, you tie it to the cause. This is what we're getting ready to do. Here's how we're going to change the world. They'll get behind you and they'll start doing it right away. But the mercenaries are there for the cash. They're there for the ice cream.
I've never thought of my kids as mercenaries, but I think I'm going to start doing that from now on. I think they truly are. But I have learned some things from this episode already. That's for sure. I'd like to take any other closing thoughts. I'd like to switch to one more, just because I think 3 is always a good number to give a little bit of compare and contrast. Rich, Jason, Dan, any other further thoughts on this one?
No, I'm good.
All right. So we got one more person, Casey, and average score again is 53. She's got a 51. You can see efficiency is very high, right? Driver behavior is actually pretty good, but this net promoter score again seems to be an issue here. So let's go take a look at a zoomed in view here. Dan, I saw you shaking your head. That was a clear sign to me. I want to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, just look again. We're starting conversations. So where are you going to start this one? You've got to start with NPS. Let's see how you can't. I mean, efficiency is great, but if your customers aren't appreciative of that efficiency, it's not going to last very long.
I'm gonna throw out a narrative that I think I've seen in the past, and I'd be curious to see what Rich, you and Jason think about this. And granted, these are all perspectives. It doesn't mean it's a truth, right? And that is, look, if their efficiency is so relatively high, right, their driver behavior is relatively high or better than average, their skills assessment is a little lower than average, I'm almost kind of thinking this person is actually just kind of a natural at their job in some regards. The light bulb has gone off, and they're really technically very good. And I know, having been in the tech world before, there are some people that are fantastic at their job, but they couldn't talk to anybody because they're so focused on the technical aspects of the job, and the overall overarching purpose of their job just hasn't sunk in with them yet. Rich, Jason, do you think that could apply here?
Yeah, I mean, that could apply. I mean, I see somebody who is process driven beyond anything. And if you tell them how to do something or what you want them to do, they're going to do it down to the T, but they don't think on their feet well. Um, that would kind of explain the skills assessment. And the MPS is a product of that. This is somebody that was told, hey, you've got to get 10 accounts done a day and you've got to do it in 5 hours. And they're making damn sure they do it. But that means that they're not spending time with their customers. They're not spending time trying to sell. And they're not spending time trying to learn and better themselves. They're just going out there every day doing the same 10 things in the order they were told to do it, the way they were told to do it. And it's leading to efficiency scores looking great, but it certainly hurts in a lot of other areas.
And Rich, I suspect you got a thought coming up here. I want to throw in one more element, right? I might even say this person might even be maybe the element of they might be surprised that they've got a very average score because they are quite proud of saying, hey, I'm doing what you're telling me to do. Look at my efficiency score. I'm a conscientious driver. I'm safe. What the hell are you guys blaming me for? I'm doing exactly what you're telling me. Rich, any thoughts around that?
I'd put this over to a behavior assessment. I prefer the DISC profile, and this is a classic case of a very strong green and probably a very strong blue. Blue's all about the processes, getting everything done, just as Jason talked about. And then the greens are very concerned about the relationships, but they also tend to be very, very, very quiet and will not speak. Oftentimes, they'll just nod, kind of like Dan's doing now as I'm talking. They'll just nod. They'll never even have a conversation with a customer. They're doing everything right, but then that other customer might be at the other end of the personality spectrum. They might be a high yellow or a high red, and they want that conversation. They want that stimulation, or maybe they're even blue, but this person's just not talking to them. So again, I would open up with a conversation again and just start talking to them and say, hey, tell me about your route. What do you like about your route? And let her talk about everything. Get her going. Efficiencies, and her truck runs great, and she loves the program, and she likes priorities. And then flip the other side. Is there anything that's holding you back from doing better? And then you're going to have to wait for her to answer. And if she is a typical green in this spectrum, she's going to say, you know what? Let me think about it. Or she's not even going to say that. She's just going to get up. She's going to walk away. And a week later, she's going to come back into your office and say, you remember when we were talking about that? I want to sit down and talk about that now. And then you need to be ready to listen.
Just Dana, I can see the wheels turning in your head. So,
Oh yeah.
So I want to put something out there. I would love to hear if anybody in the audience, again, who's listening live or in the past, or who's going to be listening to our replay. I would love to hear what you're thinking. If you're seeing the same sort of story that we're kind of meandering down here. I'd also like to tell you if these graphs have been interesting to you so far. If you type assessment into the comments, we'll do a free dimensional assessment of like efficiency or productivity, priority alignment. We'll give you a free assessment. Just type assessment in the comments, and we'll get you hooked up so you can do one of those. Dan, I don't want to leave you simmering over there for too long. What's cooking?
So would you say you were talking what you're saying with driver behavior and efficiency? I have a software development background, so when I started thinking about it in those terms, I'm like, this is the person who wants to be locked away in a box writing software. Like, they don't want to be a consultant. They don't want to talk to people. And I wrote down introvert right next to that as well. So to me, then it started going to hiring practices. When you're hiring and you're interviewing these people, are you hiring in the right way? Are you hiring? If you're hiring an MPS is like high on your level, understand that if you hire an introvert or someone who's not going to get energy from that interaction, it's going to be difficult for them to perform at a higher level. So it's just another thing that you have to look at. Are you to get the higher? Going back to the prompt here, how do you beat industry expectations? Hire correctly. Hire for the position. Know what you're looking for, and is that person going to fill out the way you think they will?
Well, I'd like to. I want to stop sharing my screen in a second here because I'd love to kind of get a synthesis of all these things that we've been talking about. Jason, Rich, any other thoughts that you had regarding this, or maybe in response to what Dan just said there?
I mean, the only other thing I would say, and Rich brought up the DISC profile, and that's something we've done here relatively recently. And I'm personally a high blue and green, which fits right in with what your assessment was of this person. And I'll tell you, when I used to be on a route, and for me to have higher NPS or customer experience scores, it's a struggle. But it's not unattainable. It's just something that you have to be aware of and understand that, hey, what are the keys? Communication with the customer doesn't always have to be standing in front and having a 10-minute conversation, shooting talking about family. But for our industry especially, the customer just wants to know that, hey, you were here, you spent the right amount of time, you did the right thing, and you can tell me what you saw. So leaving good notes, leaving a text message if that's what you're more comfortable with. But sometimes being able to use this to find out where that person's comfortable. So maybe they're not comfortable standing in front of a customer having that conversation, but they could be fine sending emails and text messages, and that's okay. That's what the customer can utilize and still get better scores. So there are other things that can work, but I think this helps you discover what those are.
Rich, some thoughts from you?
No, I'm good with that. I think this gal's probably, if you asked all of her employees, she's probably a high trust employee. She's going to show up every day and she's going to do her job and people can depend on her. She's not going to be your highest performer. Now you got to make a decision. Do you want the highest performer or do you want the higher trust value? Which one's going to go farther in your organization?
So with that, actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here because I think that's a perfect segue to where I want to kind of, as we start to near the end of the hour. This is all about productivity and increasing that employee productivity. I mean, we've seen snapshots of different people, and I think one of the things that I've distilled out of our whole conversation here is when you're able to see some of this data and you start to see what's happening with you people, you know how to shift your perspective on how you ask the question. Kind of, I think, to your point, Rich, is you can see that this is a high trust employee. They're going to show up every single day. They're going to block and tackle every day because that's what their intrinsic motivation to do is, right? So how do you translate being able to understand these different perspectives and how each one of these people is different? Because one size fits all doesn't work here. Rich, how do you turn that into productivity, right? So that you can beat those industry expectations. What are your thoughts?
So you got to do it one at a time. It's how do you eat the whole pizza, right? It's a bite at a time, piece at a time. And then before you know it, you've got the whole pizza gone. So you have to work, when you have productivity issues, you've got to work with each individual and build bridges with them and meet them, find out where they're at, how you're going to get them to get where you want. You're always going to have some of them that are going to hit all your productivity numbers. It's just the law of averages. And you're always going to have those that are going to be falling short of them. And some of them may even, unfortunately, have to leave the organization. You might have to make that tough decision, but you still got that sweet spot in the middle of all these people that just, have potential in them. You just got to go uncover what it is that they want, because if you help them get what they want, they in return are going to help you get what you want.
Dan?
Yeah, I think Rich is nailing it. And, understanding what are their intrinsic motivators. There's so many. There's autonomy, mastery, purpose, curiosity, control, relatedness, recognition. There's different ways that people are motivated intrinsically. This person might want to be recognized. And so when you're saying, hey, I want to get your NPS numbers up so that I can tell the rest of the company just how great you're doing. So you tap into that recognition motivator. Maybe they're driven by challenge. Hey, I know this is going to be hard for you, but you can get this number up and it's going to be great. You're going to be awesome at this. Putting it in front of them in a way that really speaks to who they are. It's really about knowing your employees. And I work with a lot of leaders to say, we go through the list of intrinsic motivators and say, what do you think this employee's top 3 are? And how are you having conversations with them? And a lot of times I'll find they're trying to challenge them, but they're not someone who is driven by challenge. They're driven by curiosity. So,
Jason, you and I talked a little earlier about this idea of being able to put these scorecards and things in front of people so that they can start to see how management kind of sees them. And I think to Rich and Dan's point, I mean, it's not about a one size fits all. It's about kind of being a coach for each one of those individually. Some of the stats that I've heard about that is, in the open public markets, in particular sectors, the companies that had highly engaged cultures, and I look at those scores, those overall scores, like 51 for Casey. That's her engagement score out of 100. Right? She's 51 out of 100. Are you okay with that? Is sort of the question. And the companies that in those public markets that had really high engagement scores from their employees outperformed other competitive companies by, I think the number was 686%. I mean, 7x performance. Jason, what do you see that as also the gateway, just being able to create this customized and tailored conversation coaching with each person as the way to unlock productivity?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, these two guys hit it on the head. I mean, we oftentimes get kind of pushed into, okay, we've got to increase sales. So we're going to put out these sales incentive and we're going to talk about sales all month long. And we're going to walk into a meeting and just beat everyone over the head with it. And, you and I, when we were talking earlier, we have guys that are already really good at selling. And if they sit in that meeting and listen to that, they're sitting there going, why am I here? I already do all that. I don't care. And they walk out feeling worse off than they did when they walked in. And the guy that's really bad just sits there and goes, I can never do that. This is ridiculous. What are they asking? And so you've pretty much alienated the top and bottom, those 50% of your employees, and now you're only talking to, at best, half of them. But if you can sit there and say, okay, hey, this guy is already doing great at selling. Let's talk about the other stuff. He walks out feeling like, hey, they're really trying to help me. They didn't just talk about what I'm already good at or, tell me I suck or that I'm great, but hey, they talked about what I'm good at, but also told me, hey, this is the area we can work on and let's work on it together, and they feel better. And the low performers, they may have more than one thing, but you can kind of pick those one or two that are most important and that you feel like you can make the most impact. And then, like was said earlier, sometimes somebody's not a fit and they're not going to stay with you forever, and you've got to make that call, but at least you can say in good faith that you tried to make that person better and, you gave to them what you could to help them. So I do think that individualism is the way to go. And that's what, we're really excited about here and working with you is being able to put these report cards, a visual in front of somebody, in front of a manager first, in front of an employee to show like, hey, great job. You're selling off the charts. Let's talk about the MPS. Where are you struggling? What can I help you with?
So for anybody listening in, if you want to be able to see graphs like this as well, just type assessment into the comments, and whether you're listening live or watch a replay, type assessment in the comments, and we can create some component of this so you can start to see what those scores are for your people based on real and live data from your organization, because that's where this all came from, is live data that an organization already has. We're getting close to the end here. I want to kind of distill and kind of get some maybe take-home messages or nuggets here. I feel like, Rich, I've started with you a couple of times. So I'm going to maybe start with you, Dan. If you could give one or two take-home messages from kind of all of this in terms of improving that employee production to beat the industry stats, what would you be two take-home messages be?
The first is have great data. Collect great data, have great data. And then the other one is talk about it. Don't just look at the data and have the data tell you all, interpret the narrative from what the data is telling you. We're human beings. Have conversations.
Jason?
Know what your people's strengths and opportunities are and learn what makes them tick.
So know your people, right?
Yeah.
and why. Rich?
I love data. Data is awesome. It tells a story, and I think Dan hit it, and then Jason hit it. You got to tie the two together. So just make sure you don't have any biases when you're looking at data. Don't try to read the data and make it say something it does not say. Too often we'll have that narrative go through our head. Not everybody thinks like you. Not everybody behaves like you, and not everybody's going to read the data like you. So if somebody reads it differently, ask them what about it that they see is different. There's more than one way to interpret anything in the world.
I think when it became most clear to me as being a data guy myself for most all of my professional career, when it made most sense was when I was younger. I still thought I was still in the market for finding someone of the fair sex that would pay some attention to me. I used to read Men's Health magazine, all these kind of things, and I was reading one of these little things that talked about a survey of men, and it said that 64% of men believe they're better than average drivers. I was like, all right, so data can be wrong. And because the worst part is I actually considered myself one of those people.
That's bias. There's bias in that data.
That's right. Well, for anybody who listened, and I hope you had this was a good use of your time. I would like to ask one question of you, just as a favor. If you did get some value out of this, rank this on a scale of 1 to 10. I am a data guy at the end of the day. 1 is this was not a good use of your time. 10 was this was a very good use of your time. Just type in the comments 1 to 10, 10 being really good, 1 not so much. But thank you for taking some time and listening in to the 4 of us. Jason, Rich, Dan, thank you for just sharing perspective, all years of experience, and kind of sort of the nuggets that I think a lot of people could probably take away from this. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.
Thank you.